My dream job hid a dark secret. Family versus ambition. During my dream job interview, the CEO asked me, how far would you go to get this position? That question haunts me still. I thought it was a joke, some kind of corporate power play, until he handed me a file containing a secret test that would change everything. 3 days later, my life imploded. Let me preface this by saying, I always believed I understood the boundaries of ambition, the acceptable price of success. I clawed my way through a series of dead-end, soul-crushing jobs. So, when I landed an interview with Harlan Dynamics, I felt like every sacrifice, every grueling hour, was finally culminating in something meaningful. Peter Harlan was a legend, a self-made titan who'd built his company from the ground up. Securing a final interview with him felt like winning the lottery, like I had finally cracked the code to a better life. I naively thought the hard part was over. On the day of the interview, Harlan's office was an intimidating spectacle, sleek, minimalist, and dominated by an enormous window overlooking the glittering Cleveland skyline. He was standing behind his massive desk when I walked in, his calculated gaze piercing, as if he could see straight through me, laying bare my hopes and insecurities. Derek Turner, he said, extending a hand, his voice a low, resonant rumble. I've heard a great deal about you. Thank you, I managed to say, attempting to sound confident, desperately trying to master frantic pounding of my heart. He gave a curt nod, gesturing for me to sit. For the first few minutes, the questions were standard, predictable, lulling me into a false sense of security. Then, just as I began to relax, he leaned forward, steepling his fingers, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. Tell me, Derek, he said, his voice dangerously smooth, how far would you really go to get this job? I chuckled, a nervous, involuntary sound, assuming it was one of those cliché, theoretical questions CEOs love to pose, gauging ambition and willingness to toe the line. He didn't laugh. Instead, he slid a manila folder across the desk, a sound echoing ominously in the silent room. I opened the file, my breath catching in my throat as I found myself staring at photographs, documents, and financial statements. My throat went bone dry when I realized who it was about. My cousin, Martin, someone I hadn't seen in years. Martin was complicated, a drifter, couch surfing with relatives, a person of interest in several shady financial endeavors. Why do you have this? I asked, my voice barely steady, the carefully constructed facade of confidence crumbling. Peter's mouth twisted into what I can only describe as a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a cruel, predatory expression. Call it a test of loyalty, Derek, he said, his voice laced with a chilling casualness. Bring me more information on Martin. Prove to me you're willing to do what it takes. I sat there, frozen, the air thick with unspoken implications. This wasn't a job interview. It was something far darker, far more sinister. And yet, despite the alarm bells screaming in my head, I found myself nodding, accepting the poisoned chalice. I took the file with me as I left, the weight of that thin manila folder feeling like a leaden boulder in my hand, dragging me down. What did Martin have to do with this? Why would Harlan want anything to do with him? I could barely remember the last time I even seen him, maybe at my father's funeral a few years back. A fleeting glimpse before he disappeared, leaving before I even had a chance to speak to him. We'd gone down separate paths, diverging so drastically that I didn't even know what kind of person he was anymore. And now, here I was, being asked to dig into his life, to potentially destroy him for a job. Still, the next morning, driven by a desperate, misguided hope, I dialed my mom's number. She was surprised to hear from me, and even more surprised when I started asking about Martin. Martin, why are you asking about him? Derek, she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Oh, you know, I said, forcing a light tone, my conscience twisting with guilt. Just thought of him recently, wondering how he's doing. Thought I'd catch up. My mom sighed heavily. Well, he's not doing great, Derek. He's been living with Aunt Jenny in Pittsburgh ever since everything went south with his job. Martin had always been the family's problem child, the one who couldn't quite get his act together, the constant source of whispered anxieties. I booked a bus ticket to Pittsburgh for the following morning, the guilt gnawing at me with every mile I travelled. When I arrived at Aunt Jenny's house, the sight of Martin was a punch to the gut. His face was etched with age lines around his eyes, dark shadows painting hollows beneath them. His clothes were loose, hanging off a weary frame, and he looked rough, worn down by life's relentless grind. Derek, what the hell are you doing here? He asked, his voice wary, suspicion etched on his face. I forced a smile, a pathetic attempt to mask the truth. Hey, Martin, thought I'd come by, catch up. He raised a skeptical eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Aunt Jenny emerged from the kitchen, rushing over to give me a hug, a warmth for stark contrast to the tension radiating from Martin. Derek, look at you, all grown up. Haven't seen you since. Her voice trailed off, filled with a mixture of affection and sadness. Well, it's been too long, I said, hugging her back, feeling a pang of guilt as I looked around the place. It was obvious that money was tight peeling wallpaper, dishes piled in the sink. I felt like an imposter in my neatly pressed shirt and freshly shined shoes, a symbol of the success that had eluded Martin. Aunt Jenny had always been kind, taking in family members when they needed it, but this time felt different, heavier with unspoken burdens. Martin was sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at me like he was trying to read my mind, dissecting my every move. For the next hour, we made awkward small talk, a strained dance of polite conversation. I couldn't bring myself to ask him any direct questions about his finances, so I danced around the topic, asking how he was doing, what he'd been up to. Martin gave vague answers, his eyes constantly darting around the room, as if expecting someone to burst through the door. Aunt Jenny, bless her heart, seemed oblivious to the underlying tension, chattering about old family stories and recipes. Eventually, Aunt Jenny went to bed, leaving Martin and me alone in the cramped living room, the silence amplifying the unspoken accusations. Martin watched her retreat before turning his gaze back to me, his eyes hard, devoid of warmth. "All right, Derek," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You're gonna tell me what you're really doing here?" I shifted uncomfortably, realizing there was no way to avoid the inevitable. "I just wanted to catch up," I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Martin snorted, a harsh, humorless sound. "Cut the crap, Derek. You haven't thought of me in a decade. What's going on?" I stared at him, my mind racing. Should I just come clean? Tell him about Peter Harlan, or Far? The loyalty test that felt more like blackmail. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. But Martin shook his head, cutting me off. "Forget it," he said, getting up and grabbing his jacket, his movements sharp and decisive. "I don't need this." He headed for the door, ready to escape the uncomfortable truth. "Please," I blurted out, desperate, "just hear me out." He stopped, turning slowly, his expression hard, guarded. "Hear you out about what?" I swallowed hard, feeling cornered, exposed. "I got this job interview," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "They were asking questions. About you." They had a file, Martin. Photos, financial stuff. Martin's mouth dropped open, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Harlan Dynamics. What the hell does a software company want with me?" I ran a hand through my hair, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "I don't know," I admitted, "but the CEO gave me this file and told me to get information as part of the interview process. So, that's what this is," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "A goddamn interrogation." "Yes, number. I stammered, scrambling for an explanation that wouldn't completely condemn me. "It's more than that, Martin. This is my shop. You know how hard I've worked to get here, and you think throwing me under the bus is worth it?" He interrupted, his voice rising in anger. "You think selling me out is going to get you that fancy job? Look, I didn't ask for this," I pleaded. "They blindsided me with this file. I thought maybe you could explain." "Explain what?" He spat out. "Explain why I've got a couple of $1,000 stashed away. Explain why I don't tell Aunt Jenny where it came from. Is that what you want to hear?" Derek, Martin was in deeper than I imagined, entangled in a web of secrets and desperation. "Martin," I said quietly, trying to project sincerity, "if you're in trouble, let me help you." His face twisted with anger, his eyes blazing with resentment. "Help me? Get out, Derek," he barked, pointing towards the door, his voice trembling with fury. "I don't need your help. Go back to your perfect little life, your cushy job. Whatever loyalty you think you've got, it's a lie." I stared at him, feeling helpless, the weight of my actions crushing me. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm that had opened between us, but he'd already turned away, retreating into the darkness of the house, leaving me standing alone in the cold, harsh light of the porch. I left, feeling like I'd lost something irreparable, something that could never be recovered. Back in Cleveland, 3 days later, I found myself sitting across from Peter Harlan once more, the scene playing out like a twisted, inevitable conclusion. He looked eager, almost gleeful, as he gestured for me to sit, his voice filled with anticipation. "So, Derek," he purred, "what did you find?" I shifted in my seat, every instinct screaming at me to spill everything, to confess everything I'd learned, to tell him about the catch, the shady side of Martin's life, the secrets that could secure my future. But all I could see was Martin's face, that look of betrayal, that searing accusation in his eyes. "Not much," I said, my voice betraying my inner turmoil. "Martin's just getting by, trying to stay out of trouble." Peter's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "That's it. That's all you found?" "Yes," I said firmly, hoping he couldn't see through my carefully constructed lie. "He's clean." Peter studied me for a long moment, his gaze intense and unwavering, making me feel like a bug pin under a microscope. I felt a chill run down my spine, a premonition of the storm that was about to break. "I'm not so sure about that," he said, his voice dangerously low. "No, but you are," I countered, my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins. You think I don't have other sources? That I didn't already know what's going on with Martin? This was a test. Derek, he revealed, a predatory gleam flickering in his eyes. A test of loyalty. My heart pounded in my chest, the realization hit me like a physical blow. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. Peter's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. I wanted to see if you were willing to do whatever it took, he said, his voice devoid of warmth. But it seems you've got a soft spot for family. It's a pity. I clenched my fists, anger bubbling up inside me, threatening to erupt. So, this was never about my skills, was it? I said, my voice shaking with rage. Just a twisted way to see if I'd betray my own cousin. Call it a necessary precaution, he said, shrugging dismissively. I don't hire people who hesitate, especially not over something as trivial as family. Trivial, I repeated, my voice shaking with indignation. How dare you call my family trivial? Do you think I had turned my back on my family for a job? I asked, my voice filled with scorn. Peter raised an eyebrow, seemingly unfazed by my outburst. That's exactly what I expected, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Family is just an obstacle to people like us. But clearly, you're not one of us. I stood up, feeling a surge of defiance, and then found clarity cutting through the fog of ambition. You know what, Peter? I said, my voice ringing with conviction. Keep your job. I don't want it. He let out a cold laugh, waving me off dismissively. You think you're making some kind of statement, Derek, that you're walking away with your integrity intact? Please. You just cost yourself a future. I didn't respond. I turned and walked out, leaving him sitting behind his desk, a monument to ruthless ambition. The interview had been a lie, a carefully orchestrated charade. Peter didn't want ambition. He wanted submission, unquestioning obedience. Back home, I sat in my apartment, the silence amplifying the weight of my actions. I betrayed Martin just by showing up, by even considering Peter's offer. And now, any hope of repairing that relationship was gone, shattered by my own misguided choices. Days turned into weeks, each one filled with regret and self-recrimination. Then, one day, a text message flashed on my phone. It was from Martin. My heart pounded as I stared at the message, hope flickering in the darkness. Was this a chance to make things right? I agreed to meet him at a bar downtown, not sure what to expect, bracing myself for the worst. When I arrived, he was already there, nursing a drink, his expression unreadable, a mask of guarded indifference. Thanks for meeting me, I said, sliding into the seat across from him, the words sounding inadequate, almost pathetic. He shrugged, his gaze fixed on his glass, avoiding my eyes. Yeah, well, Aunt Jenny thought I should hear you out. I swallowed hard, gathering my thoughts, trying to find the right words to express the depth of my regret. Martin, I'm sorry, I said, my voice filled with sincerity. I shouldn't have come to Pittsburgh. I shouldn't have asked those questions. I let that job get to my head, and I was wrong, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, his eyes cold, piercing. Do you have any idea what you put me through? He asked, his voice tight with suppressed anger. I started, but he cut me off. I thought you turned me in. Derek, I thought you were about to lose everything. I felt a lump form in my throat, choking off my words. I managed to say I couldn't. He let out a bitter laugh, a hollow sound devoid of humor. Well, you still came poking around, didn't you? Had me thinking you were family. I do care, Martin, I insisted, my voice pleading. I made a mistake, but that doesn't change the fact that you're family. He shook his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. Family, you left years ago, he said, his voice laced with bitterness. The only family I have is Aunt Jenny. I left, chasing my dreams, blinded by ambition. If there's any way I can make this right, just tell me, I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. I'll do whatever it takes. He studied me for a long time, his expression unreadable, as if he was trying to gauge the sincerity of my words. Maybe there's nothing you can do, he said finally, his voice flat, devoid of hope. Maybe you just have to live with what you did. The reality of his words hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless and reeling. I come here hoping for some kind of redemption, some easy path to forgiveness, but there was no quick fix, no magic formula to undo the damage I'd caused. Eventually, Martin stood up, tossing a few bills on the table. Good luck, Derek, he said, his voice flat, indifferent. Maybe one day you understand that some things aren't worth sacrificing. Surrounded by the hum of people who had no idea that my entire world had just shifted, I watched him disappear into the street, feeling the loss like a physical ache, a gaping wound in my soul. I'd come hoping to rebuild some bridge, some semblance of the bond we once had, but all I had managed to do was widen the chasm, pushing him further away. For weeks, I drifted through life, feeling like I was on autopilot, going through the motions without any real purpose, without the job at Harlan Dynamics, without the family I alienated. I didn't have anything to ground me, to give my life meaning. I had sacrificed my integrity for ambition, only to find that neither ambition nor loyalty would ever mean the same to me again. It was a month later when I got a call from Aunt Jenny again. She was the one constant, the only family member who'd always been there, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I owed her explanation, if nothing else, an apology. I dialed her number, my heart racing as the phone rang, each ring amplifying my anxiety. "Derek, what a surprise, honey," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "I was just thinking of you the other day." Hearing her voice brought a flood of emotions to the surface, a mixture of guilt, gratitude, and a deep sense of shame. "Hey, Aunt Jenny," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I wanted to check in, since you and Martin had that misunderstanding." "I'm so sorry, Aunt Jenny," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed things up. I didn't mean to hurt him." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the silence amplifying my guilt. "Derek," she said finally, her voice soft and forgiving. "Family is complicated, and sometimes we don't realize what we have until we lose it. Martin's, he always does what he thinks he has to do." I wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that Martin might eventually forgive me. But a part of me knew it wasn't that simple, that the damage I had done might be irreparable. "Thanks, Aunt Jenny," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "You've always been there for me, and I can't thank you enough for that." "I don't deserve it. I'm here if you need anything," she said, her voice filled with warmth and affection. "Your family, Derek, I'm not going anywhere." Yet, despite her unwavering support, Martin continued to keep his distance, avoiding me whenever possible. Whenever I asked about him, Aunt Jenny would offer vague reassurances, but I could sense the underlying tension, the unspoken reminder that he hadn't forgiven me, that the scars of my betrayal still ran deep. Then, one day, about a year later, I got a call from Aunt Jenny again. It was a day like any other. I was at work, buried in spreadsheets, when my phone vibrated on my desk, disrupting the monotony of the day. I answered it with a sense of foreboding, a premonition that something terrible had happened. "Derek," she said, her voice trembling with panic. "It's Martin. He's in the hospital." "What happened?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest, fear gripping me like a vice. "Accident," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "It was on his way to work. He's in bad shape. They're saying he might not." Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. "I'm coming," I said, my voice filled with a newfound determination. "Tell me which hospital, Aunt Jenny." When I arrived at the hospital, Aunt Jenny was sitting in the waiting room, her face pale and drawn with worry, her eyes red from crying. She looked lost, vulnerable, and the sight of her distress pierced me to the core. This wasn't about my mistakes anymore. This was about Martin, about family, and about whatever came next, whatever fate had in store for us. I was past before a doctor finally came out, his face neutral and unreadable, offering no clues about Martin's condition. "Family of Martin Turner," he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Aunt Jenny and I both stood up, our hearts pounding in our chests, bracing ourselves for the worst. "He's stable," the doctor said, his voice carefully measured. "But he's not out of the woods yet. He'll need time to recover, and he'll need support." At that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, this was a second chance, an opportunity to redeem myself, to prove that I was worthy of their forgiveness. Aunt Jenny looked up at me, her eyes filled with a silent plea. "He'll need us, Derek," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Both of us." The following months were difficult, a grueling test of endurance. Martin's recovery was slow and arduous, and he was in and out of consciousness for the first few weeks, drifting in and out of a hazy, dreamlike state. I spent countless hours just sitting outside his room, hoping he'd be awake when I got there, praying for a sign that he was going to pull through. The first time he opened his eyes and saw me, his face was a mask of anger and resentment, as if he wanted to throw me out of the room. But he was too weak to argue, too exhausted to fight. I started telling him stories from when we were kids, memories of simpler times, of shared adventures and unbreakable bonds. Slowly, he softened, listening without the usual bite in his eyes. Though he rarely said anything back, his silence a constant reminder of the chasm that still separated us. One evening, when I was about to leave, he spoke up, his voice barely a whisper, his words slurred and indistinct. "Why are you here, Derek?" he asked, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. I turned back, my heart aching at the sight of his pain. "Because your family, Martin," I said, my voice filled with sincerity, "and I'm trying to make it right." He looked at me, his expression unreadable, his eyes filled with a deep-seated mistrust. "You think showing up now makes up for everything?" he asked, his voice laced with bitterness. You think a few hospital visits can erase all the damage you've done? I shook my head, swallowing a lump in my throat. I know it doesn't, I admitted, my voice barely audible, but I'm here because family is all we've got, and I don't want to lose that. Not again. He let out a sigh, his gaze drifting away from me, staring out the window at the darkening sky. For a long time, he didn't say anything, his silence amplifying the weight of my guilt. But then, just as I was about to leave, he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can trust you, Derek, he said, his eyes filled with doubt and uncertainty. But maybe we can try. The months that followed weren't easy. Martin had setbacks, moments of despair when he seemed ready to give up, to succumb to the pain and exhaustion. But slowly, painstakingly, we rebuilt our relationship, brick by brick, repairing the damage I had inflicted. Late night hospital visits, quiet conversations, shared memories. Slowly, we found a rhythm, a tentative truce built on a foundation of forgiveness and understanding. One night, after he was finally discharged from the hospital and settled back at Aunt Jenny's, we were sitting on the porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, when he turned to me, his eyes filled with a newfound warmth. You're not that kind of guy, Derek, he said quietly, his voice filled with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. I looked at him, a complex mix of emotions swirling within me. I got caught up, I admitted, my voice filled with regret. I thought that job would fix everything, make all the sacrifices worth it. But I was wrong. It cost me more than I was willing to give. Yeah, he said softly, a small smile playing on his lips. Well, I guess we all make mistakes. The next morning, as we sat round Aunt Jenny's kitchen table, drinking coffee, Martin finally looked at me, a small, tentative smile on his face. You're really staying in town? He asked, his voice filled with a hint of disbelief. Yeah, I said, smiling back, my heart filled with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For as long as it takes, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was where I belonged, surrounded by the people who mattered most. A family I should have valued all along. I had found my way back to family. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than any job ever could be. So, Reddit, after everything I've told you, do you think I handled this situation correctly? Was walking away from the job the right decision, even though it meant sacrificing my career ambitions? Should I have done more to help Martin, even before his accident, or was his resentment justified, a consequence of my past actions? I'm really struggling to come to terms with the choices I made and their impact on my family. And I am desperate for some outside perspective. What would you have done in my shoes? Your thoughts and opinion would mean a lot to me as I try to navigate this complicated situation and move forward with my life. Because there are still times I wonder if I could have made some choices that would have made me feel better than I do now.